As President Trump's administration ramps up mass deportation efforts, undocumented immigrants in certain U.S. states face unprecedented challenges. While some regions offer protections, others have strict immigration laws, heavy ICE involvement, and intensified border security, making life for undocumented individuals increasingly difficult. In this video, 10 worst states for illegal immigrants as Trump launches mass deportations in the U.S. We break down the key factors that put immigrants at risk, from state policies and law enforcement cooperation to employment restrictions and crackdowns on sanctuary cities. The Trump administration's renewed deportation push is reshaping the landscape, and undocumented communities must stay informed. Which states are the most dangerous for undocumented immigrants? Watch till the end to find out. Before we dive in, hit that like button, subscribe to Virtual Travel by Brian, and ring the notification bell for more insights on U.S. migration trends, state policies, and travel updates. Let's jump right in. Number 10. Virginia. Virginia, the state that proudly boasts Virginia is for lovers, but apparently that love doesn't extend to undocumented immigrants. If you're in the Old Dominion hoping to fly under the radar, you might want to rethink your life choices, because immigration enforcement here is getting serious and the welcome mat is looking a little, well, scorched. Virginia is one of those places that likes to keep people guessing when it comes to immigration policies. Some cities, like Alexandria and Richmond, offer sanctuary-style protections, but drive just a few miles into counties like Prince William, and you're suddenly in ICE's favorite hunting ground. Seriously, the immigration enforcement mood here shifts faster than Virginia's weather. Sunny one second, ice storm the next. And speaking of ice, their presence has ramped up significantly in the past few years. The D.C. metro area, which includes parts of Northern Virginia, has become a hotspot for immigration raids. And let's be honest, if federal agents are going to be anywhere, it's going to be near the nation's capital. ICE doesn't even need to book a flight. They're already in the neighborhood. But wait, it gets better. Virginia's employment laws have tightened, making it increasingly difficult for undocumented immigrants to find work without getting flagged. In 2020, the state actually loosened some restrictions, but as the political winds have changed, so has the attitude toward undocumented workers. Employers are under pressure to comply with stricter verification systems, which means fewer job opportunities and higher risks of exposure. And if you think you can just lay low and keep moving, well, good luck. Prince William County, for example, is one of the most aggressive counties when it comes to immigration enforcement. For years, local officials have actively collaborated with ICE. Translation: if you get caught up in the legal system here, even for something minor, you might find yourself on a fast track to deportation. So, in short, Virginia is the classic case of it depends. Some areas will fight to protect you, others will practically drive you to the deportation center themselves. If you're undocumented and thinking about settling here, you might want to have an escape plan. Just in case. Stick around as we move up the list, because trust me, Virginia is just the beginning. The next states, even worse. Number 9. North Carolina. North Carolina, home to sweet tea, college basketball, and unfortunately, some of the most aggressive immigration crackdowns in the South. If you're undocumented and thinking about settling here, you might want to invest in a good pair of running shoes. Because law enforcement in this state isn't just enforcing the law, they're enforcing immigration laws too. Here's the deal. North Carolina has brought ICE back into the game, and they're playing to win. Many local sheriffs, who once decided to take a step back from immigration enforcement, have changed their minds faster than a weather app in hurricane season. They're signing 287G agreements, which basically deputize local cops as part-time ICE agents. Yes, that means if you get pulled over for something as minor as a busted taillight, you might find yourself in a one-way conversation with immigration authorities. And let's talk about those rural areas. If you thought you could escape the ICE patrols by hiding out in the countryside, think again. In many parts of rural North Carolina, local law enforcement is even stricter than in the cities. Why? Well, it turns out small-town sheriffs love their ICE cooperation agreements. Some counties are practically competing to see who can deport the most people the fastest. The political climate in North Carolina is also shifting, and not in a good way if you're undocumented. Lawmakers are introducing tougher immigration laws left and right, making life harder for undocumented immigrants trying to work, rent homes, or simply exist without drawing attention. And the cherry on top? If you're caught up in the system in North Carolina, there's a high chance you'll be fast-tracked for deportation. The state isn't just cooperating with federal immigration officials, it's hand-delivering people to them. So if you're undocumented and living in North Carolina, everyday activities come with an added layer of stress. Driving to work? Risky. Sending your kid to school? Risky. Even stepping outside to grab a gallon of milk? You better hope your local sheriff hasn't decided to play ICE agent today. Number 8. Georgia. Georgia, where the peaches are sweet, the tea is sweeter, but the immigration policies? About as bitter as an unripe pecan. If you're undocumented in this state, you're not just on thin ice, you're basically walking across a frozen lake in flip-flops. Georgia doesn't just enforce immigration laws, they take pride in it. First things first, Georgia is one of the harshest immigration enforcement states in the South. And if you know anything about the South's history with strict laws, that's saying a lot. Law enforcement here works so closely with ICE, you'd think they were business partners. If you get caught in Georgia without legal status, you're not just getting a ticket. You're getting a first-class trip to an ICE detention center, no layovers. And speaking of making life difficult, let's talk about jobs. Georgia has some of the strictest employment verification laws, meaning if you're undocumented and looking for work, your chances of getting hired are about as good as a snowstorm in Atlanta. E-Verify is required for most employers, and businesses that hire undocumented workers can face severe penalties. In other words, even low-paying, under-the-table jobs are becoming harder to find. Thinking about laying low in a sanctuary city? Bad news, there aren't any. Georgia is one of those states that doesn't believe in sanctuary policies. Zero. Zilch. Nada. If anything, local governments are expected to actively cooperate with immigration enforcement. Some counties even go the extra mile by signing 287G agreements, which means local cops can act as ICE agents and detain undocumented immigrants on the spot. And if you think the big cities like Atlanta are a safe haven, don't get too comfortable. While Atlanta has historically been a little more lenient, ICE raids are still a thing, and it only takes one policy shift or election result for that to change overnight. So, let's recap. ICE-friendly police? Check. No sanctuary protections? Check. Harder to find jobs? Double check. Georgia isn't just unfriendly to undocumented immigrants, it's practically rolling out the red carpet for deportation. Number 7. Arizona. Welcome to Arizona, the land of scorching heat, breathtaking landscapes, and oh yeah, some of the toughest immigration laws in the country. If there was ever a state that treats immigration enforcement like an Olympic sport, Arizona would be gunning for the gold. Let's talk about SB 1070, or as it was famously known, the Show Me Your Papers law. Back in 2010, Arizona decided it wasn't just enough to let ICE handle deportations. They wanted to get in on the action too. This law basically turned every cop into an honorary Border Patrol agent, allowing them to stop and question people about their immigration status if they had reasonable suspicion. Translation: if you looked like you might be undocumented, you were getting questioned. Although parts of SB 1070 have been struck down, the mentality behind it never really left. Local police in Arizona still work hand-in-hand with ICE, and deportation here happens at lightning speed. If you get detained in Arizona without legal status, there's a good chance you'll be in ICE custody before you can say Grand Canyon. And speaking of Border Patrol, Arizona has some of the highest border security activity in the country. With miles of open desert leading into Mexico, border agents patrol the area like hawks looking for their next meal. Drones, sensors, and high-tech surveillance towers mean if you try to cross illegally, they'll probably spot you before you even finish your trek through the desert. But it's not just the border that's heavily monitored. Arizona's major cities aren't much safer either. Phoenix, Tucson, and other urban areas see frequent ICE raids and immigration checkpoints. Even routine traffic stops can turn into deportation proceedings, thanks to local police departments that actively cooperate with federal immigration authorities. And let's not forget, Arizona is also home to some of the harshest detention facilities in the country. If you're undocumented and end up in one of these centers, good luck, because conditions aren't exactly what you'd call five-star hospitality. So, if you're undocumented and planning to pass through Arizona, do yourself a favor, don't stay too long, and definitely don't get pulled over. This state may have some of the most beautiful sunsets in the world, but for undocumented immigrants, it's nothing short of a nightmare. Number 6. Illinois. Illinois, where the pizza is deep, the winters are brutal, and the immigration policies are confusing at best, terrifying at worst. If you're undocumented in the Prairie State, you might think Chicago has your back. And in some ways it does, for now. But step 1 foot outside the city limits, and it's a whole different story. Let's start with the good news. Don't get too excited, it's brief. Chicago is a sanctuary city, meaning local law enforcement isn't supposed to cooperate with ICE. That's great if you never leave the city. But here's the catch. Chicago's protection isn't bulletproof. Political winds shift fast, and there's growing pressure to roll back those protections. Now for the bad news, and there's a lot of it. The rest of Illinois isn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. Many suburban and rural counties don't share Chicago's sanctuary policies, and some actively cooperate with ICE. That means more immigration raids, more detentions, and more deportations happening quietly in small towns. So if you thought avoiding the big city would keep you safe, think again. Oh, and let's not forget Illinois' budget crisis. The state is broke, really broke. And guess what that means? Funding for migrant services is getting slashed left and right. Need legal help? Fewer resources. Looking for housing assistance? Good luck with that. In short, life for undocumented immigrants in Illinois is getting harder, not easier. And speaking of hardships, ICE has been ramping up activity in Illinois, particularly in suburbs and rural areas. You know, the places where people still think Sanctuary City is some kind of dystopian sci-fi movie. More undocumented individuals are getting swept up in raids, and once you're in the system here, getting out isn't easy. To top it all off, political pressure to increase deportations is heating up. While some leaders want to protect immigrant communities, others are pushing to roll back protections and crack down even harder. So whether Illinois remains a safe space depends on who's in charge next election. Bottom line, if you're undocumented in Illinois, Chicago might be your best bet, but it's no fortress. And if you're outside the city, you're basically playing a game of will they or won't they with ICE. We're halfway through the list, and trust me, things are about to get even more intense. If you've been shocked so far, just wait until you see what's coming next. But before we dive into the top 5 worst states for undocumented immigrants, take a second to hit that like button if you're finding this eye-opening. It helps more people see this video. And drop a comment below. Do any of these states surprise you? Have you or someone you know experienced immigration crackdowns in one of these places? I want to hear your thoughts. Alright, let's keep going, because the next states make Illinois look like a vacation resort. Buckle up. Number 5. New Jersey. New Jersey, famous for its diners, traffic jams, and a certain attitude that says, "What are you looking at?" But if you're an undocumented immigrant, this state might be looking at you a little too closely, because New Jersey is one of the most unpredictable places for immigration enforcement. Let's start with the numbers. New Jersey has the 5th largest undocumented population in the US. That means a huge part of the workforce is made up of undocumented immigrants, especially in construction, service jobs, and agriculture. You'd think a state that relies so heavily on undocumented labor would, maybe not actively try to deport them? But nope. New Jersey is basically 2 different states when it comes to immigration policy. In some areas, you're relatively safe thanks to sanctuary protections. Cities like Newark and Jersey City have strong policies that limit cooperation with ICE, and they've openly pushed back against Trump's mass deportation agenda. Sounds great, right? Hold that thought. Because step outside those cities, and you're suddenly in ICE territory. There are counties in New Jersey that are so cooperative with federal immigration enforcement, they might as well have a direct hotline to ICE headquarters. Some actively participate in the 287G program, meaning local police can turn a routine traffic stop into a one-way trip out of the country. So if you're undocumented and driving through one of these areas, better make sure that brake light is working. And let's not forget the detainment risks. New Jersey may have some friendly pockets, but ICE is always lurking. In fact, it's one of the few states where immigration raids happen regularly, even in suburban areas. So just because you're not near the border doesn't mean you're safe. ICE is everywhere, and they don't take days off. So, what's the verdict? New Jersey is like that friend who's really supportive one day and then totally ghosts you the next. One part of the state is fighting for immigrant rights, while another is handing people over to ICE on a silver platter. If you're undocumented here, you better know exactly where you stand, because stepping into the wrong county could mean stepping into serious trouble. Number 4. New York. New York, the land of opportunity, Broadway lights, $1,500 shoebox apartments, and increasingly aggressive immigration enforcement? Yep, you heard that right. While NYC might be the ultimate sanctuary city on paper, the reality is a lot more complicated. Let's start with the good news, which, spoiler alert, doesn't last long. New York City has some of the strongest sanctuary policies in the country. That means local law enforcement isn't supposed to hand people over to ICE like a takeout order. Sounds great, right? Well, here's the catch. Federal immigration agents do not care. They've ramped up raids across the state, targeting not just border areas, but right in NYC itself. And it's not just serious criminals getting deported. No. High-profile cases have shown that even minor offenses can get undocumented individuals in deep trouble. You forgot to renew your car registration? That could be enough to put you on ICE's radar. Jaywalked a little too often in Times Square? Better hope no one's checking your papers. No crime is too small when deportation quotas need to be met. And let's talk about housing. If you thought finding an affordable place in NYC was hard for citizens, try doing it while undocumented. The state is facing a major housing crisis, and with record-high migrant surges, competition for space is fierce. Landlords are getting pickier, and the city's resources are stretching thin, making life even tougher for undocumented residents just trying to survive. Meanwhile, outside of NYC, New York State isn't nearly as immigrant-friendly. Some areas are cooperating with federal authorities, meaning ICE is free to operate with little pushback. If you're undocumented upstate or in Long Island, let's just say, you might want to keep a low profile. So, is New York a sanctuary? Technically, yes. But just because the city says it's immigrant-friendly doesn't mean the feds agree. ICE has made it clear that New York isn't off limits, and the current housing and political climate is only making things worse. Number 3, Florida. Florida, where people go to retire, vacation, and apparently get deported faster than you can say Miami Beach. If you're an undocumented immigrant in the Sunshine State, brace yourself, because Florida has become one of the most hostile places in the U.S. for undocumented residents. First off, let's talk jobs. Florida's new immigration laws have cracked down hard on undocumented workers, making it nearly impossible to find legal employment. Thanks to mandatory E-Verify, most employers are now required to confirm a worker's legal status before hiring them. Translation? If you're undocumented, you can kiss that construction gig, restaurant job, or landscaping work goodbye. And no, even paying under the table isn't as easy as it used to be, because businesses are terrified of getting fined or shut down. And just when you thought things couldn't get any worse, Governor Ron DeSantis has taken immigration enforcement to a whole new level. If there were a Hall of Fame for politicians cracking down on undocumented immigrants, he'd be up there with a gold plaque. Under his leadership, Florida has become one of the most aggressive states in working with ICE. From new state laws targeting undocumented workers to busing migrants out of the state, DeSantis has made it clear, if you're undocumented in Florida, you're not welcome. Oh, and let's not forget the risk of detainment and deportation. In Florida, even long-term undocumented residents who have lived here for decades aren't safe. People who have built families, businesses, and communities are being swept up in raids and deported faster than tourists fleeing a hurricane. And with increased cooperation between local police and ICE, even minor infractions, like a broken taillight or jaywalking, could be enough to put you in ICE custody. So let's recap. harder to find jobs, stricter laws, increased ICE cooperation, and a governor who's all in on deportations. Florida may be known for its sunshine, beaches, and theme parks, but for undocumented immigrants, this place is looking more like a real-life horror movie. Number 2. Texas. Welcome to Texas, where everything is bigger, including the number of deportations. If you're undocumented in the Lone Star State, you're not just walking a tightrope, you're walking it blindfolded, in cowboy boots over a pit of rattlesnakes. Let's start with the basics. Texas has the second largest undocumented population in the U.S., with about 1.6 million people living under the radar. And if you think that number is enough to make Texas ease up on enforcement, think again, because this state is about as friendly to undocumented immigrants as a bull is to a rodeo clown. First up, laws. Texas has some of the strictest anti-immigration policies in the country. Forget sanctuary cities, they're actually banned here. That's right, thanks to Senate Bill 4, local law enforcement is required to cooperate with ICE. In other words, if you're undocumented and run into the police for something as minor as a traffic violation, you might as well start packing your bags. And speaking of ICE, Texas has what we'd call a best friend forever relationship with federal immigration enforcement. If you get detained in Texas, you don't just get a court date and a slap on the wrist, you get fast-tracked to deportation faster than a speeding pickup truck on an open highway. Texas doesn't play around. Then there's the border. Being one of the main entry points into the U.S., Texas is absolutely loaded with Border Patrol agents, surveillance towers, drones, and enough fencing to make Home Depot jealous. It's one of the most heavily patrolled states in the country, meaning getting in is hard and staying in even harder. If you're undocumented, just stepping outside near the border can feel like walking into a real-life game of Where's ICE? And if you think moving deeper into Texas is safer, think again. ICE raids in Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio have been ramping up, and no one is off limits. Even long-term undocumented residents who have lived in Texas for decades are being rounded up, detained, and deported. No sanctuary cities, ultra-strict immigration laws, a VIP relationship with ICE, and an army of Border Patrol agents patrolling every inch of the state. Texas is not the place to be if you're undocumented. It's a high-risk zone, and if you're caught, you're more likely to see the inside of a detention center than the inside of a Whataburger. Number 1. California. And here we are, the number 1 worst state for undocumented immigrants. You might be thinking, wait, California? The land of palm trees, Hollywood, and avocado toast? Isn't this a sanctuary state? Well, yes, but also no. California has the largest undocumented immigrant population in the U.S., over 2.7 million people. You'd think that would mean better protections, right? Wrong. Because while California talks a big game about being a safe haven, ICE has made it one of their favorite playgrounds for deportation sweeps. Let's start with the clash of the titans, California versus the federal government. While state leaders have passed sanctuary laws, ICE isn't exactly backing down. In fact, California is one of the most targeted states for federal immigration raids. If you're undocumented and live here, just existing feels like a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek. And let's talk money. Even if you somehow dodge the ever-present risk of deportation, California's sky-high cost of living makes life incredibly tough for undocumented immigrants. Rent is through the roof, wages aren't keeping up, and everyday expenses are draining pockets faster than a Las Vegas casino. For many undocumented families, just affording basic necessities is becoming an impossible task. Then there's the political pressure. While some parts of California are actively fighting for immigrant rights, others, especially in more conservative-leaning counties, are siding with stricter enforcement measures. It's a constant tug-of-war, and undocumented immigrants are the ones caught in the middle. So, despite its progressive reputation, California is actually one of the riskiest places to be undocumented. Sure, it may offer more protections on paper, but ICE isn't slowing down anytime soon, and the rising cost of living is pushing migrant communities to the brink. So, there you have it, the 10 worst states for undocumented immigrants as Trump launches mass deportations. If you made it this far, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Which state surprised you the most? Are you seeing immigration crackdowns happening where you live? And don't forget, Subscribe to Virtual Travel by Brian for more deep dives into immigration trends, relocation advice, and everything you need to know about where to live in the US. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until next time, stay informed, stay safe, and stay out of ICE's way.